Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Lang, and I'm the Associate for Administration at the Presbytery of Minnesota Valleys in Willmar. Welcome, and thanks for attending our webinar this morning. Our speaker today is Shirley Carter. She is the Executive Director of the Rice Health Foundation at Rice Memorial Hospital Carris Health in Willmar, and holds a Master of Business Administration degree with an emphasis in healthcare, and she is a certified fundraising executive. This webinar is another of our Transformation Going Beyond Change events. Making the Ask will provide insights into creating a culture of philanthropy in congregations by connecting the church's purpose with opportunities for giving. We'll learn about how age and gender impacts giving, and we'll learn to feel comfortable asking. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on our site, minnesotavalleys.org. We ask participants to mute when they come into the meeting and double check to make sure that that microphone has a line through it. And that should be on the bottom left of your screen. Shirley will answer the questions at the end of the presentation, and you can type into the chat box with your questions. And there is, when you hover over your screen, there should be a little chat bubble, and you can ask your questions there. Welcome, Shirley, and I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? Thanks for joining us this morning. Full disclosure, first thing, this is an inaugural presentation using Zoom, so hopefully all goes well. Today, we will be talking about how we make an ask. Can everyone see the slide okay? Thumbs up, great. All right. Asking or making an ask is an important part in how we develop relationships and how we build a culture of philanthropy amongst our fill in the blank, our constituents, be it your church members or any other group of people you're working with and seeking financial support from. So we will start the presentation with a few facts. One, we know that church attendance is declining, especially in the US, not so much in Africa and other places. Two, we know that giving to organized religion is declining. There's a lot of competition from other causes. And three, we know that tithing members are aging and they are dying faster than we can replace them on our rolls, particularly at church. So what can we do? Some of the things that we see as opportunities are looking differently at how we retain our aging members and how we attract the younger generations. Another one is how we identify, cultivate, and steward relationships around a common purpose. And the third thing to consider is how do we create that passion for God and His service? So our agenda today is, we have four slides that we will, four main topics that we will discuss. One, how we build relationships. Two, how we start the conversation. Three, knowing our audience and our competition. And four, stewardship and gratitude. So building relationships. We all know that relationships is everything. And that is no different in the church than in a hospital setting or in a community with any other number of civic organizations. Relationships is everything. So when we think about how we make our ask or how we engage people in giving to support philanthropy, we go back to the beginning, is developing those relationships, creating opportunities for us to have conversations with our stakeholders, our members, and really listen to their stories learn about what is important to them and what they care about, understanding their values and those things that motivate them. And the way that I find it helpful is in informal gatherings. It can be one-on-one meetings, it can be small group discussions, just really trying to understand your constituents and those things that, again, are important to them and what they value in learning their stories. Now, listening to their stories and understanding where they come from is important, but also what is important is sharing your story. People learn to get comfortable with people because they begin to understand and they start to find those common threads that they can relate to. So listening is a big part, and asking those open-ended questions so that you are able to get the information that you need to help you set the pace or how you begin your relationship. And then after you've done all of that, the next step would be sharing your passion for ministry as you share your personal stories and all of those things that are important to you. The message should always be around how you
Could everyone make sure they are muted? Thanks.
I'm sorry, mine said that I was. I'll look right now.
So the message is how you not only share your story, but how you share your passion for your ministry and the mission that is, or the missions that are important to you. And then you begin to share how you can partner with your constituents, your members, in mission together. So an example for me would be when I move to a new community, the first thing, my priority is always an environmental scan and trying to identify who my key stakeholders are, making the time to get to know them, understand their stories, those things that motivate them, that are important to them, getting involved in community, and then identifying champions who would be those people that I can rely on to help me deliver my message. I'm only one person, you only one person in your congregation. It's always important to look for those others who can become your allies to carry on the message with you and help bring others along. And keeping in mind that those people who are the formal leaders are not the only ones who can help you carry your message. Look for those informal leaders, those influencers who are quiet, who you may not necessarily assume have the influence with others, but who may be able to help you with the messaging as well. So after we've done our basic relationship building, keeping in mind that relationship is everything, and remembering that friends ask friends to give, we think about how we start the conversation. Our conversations around gifting should always be based on a case for support. Why are we doing this? Why is it important to us? Why should someone invest their resources to help with fill in the blank? So when we develop our case for support, we should always remember to tie our support, the gifting, the money, with the mission. An old nun said many, many years ago when they were trying to discuss how they were going to continue to impact their community by providing social services, she just got up and said, no money, no mission. And that just summed up everything. If you don't have the resources, to carry on your mission, you have nothing to work with. So remember that money and mission go hand in hand. And also remember that people give because they are, one, inspired to give to something or to someone, or because someone asked them to. Two, they feel a sense of urgency, and usually that urgency is something that's created in the messaging. And three, because they want to make a difference. They want to have an impact. They want to make a statement. So those are some of the key drivers that motivate people to give. And that's why it's important to identify those common threads that are important to your members or your constituents, and that are also important to you and your organization. Keeping in mind that gifts make ministry happen, aligned to no money, no mission, we should, when we're crafting our messages, not focus on those things that don't pull your heartstrings, so to speak. For example, the message shouldn't be about, oh, we need money because we have to keep the lights on or we have to pay salaries. The message should be around, we need support so that we can carry on missions together. So be it sharing the word of God to others in the community, feeding the hungry, sheltering those who are homeless, all those things that motivate people to give over and beyond what they're required to give is what we focus on, and not those things that are basic. Nothing about keeping the lights on is attractive, even though we all know it's very important. But in order to motivate people to act, we have to be able to connect their interest with the opportunities that we have for their giving. Again, we want to always, when we start the conversation, work with our allies or our champions to help us carry the story. The more people we have enthusiastic about the common cause or a common purpose, the more we're able to get that message across. So that's why seeking help is so important. And we should always remember that Matthew 7:7 is a verse that is so relevant and important to all of us. And it relates not only to seeking salvation, it's also keen to how you ask and receive for those resources to carry on your mission. So ask and it shall be given to you, and you know the rest. The next thing we'll talk about is knowing your audience. And I'll ask a couple of questions. Since you're on mute right now, you can just make notes and you can ask, you can answer, or you can ask follow-up questions after that. But when we are in this process of identifying who our stakeholders are, who our champions are, and who we are in partnership with, we should dig deeper and look at the different generations. Who are those in our congregations and what generations do fall in? We know that those who are the GIs, or the greatest generation, and the silent generations are those who make up the between 10 to 25% of givers in any one congregation. So how are we engaging the seniors in our group, and how are we motivating them to give? And more importantly, how do we engage the younger generation, the Gen Z and the Ys and the X's? The way that we engage them should be different or is different from how we engage the olders. Because a gift envelope for weekly tithe works very well for somebody who is 75 years old or even 65 years old. That doesn't necessarily work for someone who is in her 20s or even in her 30s or 40s. So knowing our generations, the generational differences, and crafting our messaging so that we can appeal to the different generations in a way that is more effective is something that we should always be aware of. So for an example, I am a Gen Xer, and I don't mind putting my tithe in an envelope and putting it in church when I am in church. However, when I'm not in church, then church has to wait until I'm there to make my gift. And that's the same for those who are in the older generations. My daughter, on the other hand, who is a millennial, she wants to make a gift using the app right in service or whether she's on an island somewhere. And that's how they give. That's how they worship also. If I'm not in church, I more than likely wouldn't hear a sermon, except maybe I do a live stream from another church, and then I can listen to a sermon that way. My daughter's church, they do live streaming, and so wherever she is in the world, she can worship and she can make her gifts. So those are some of the things that we need to think about and try to incorporate in our cultural philanthropy and engagement when we are looking to getting people involved in support of our work. So we know that millennials are the largest generation in the workforce today, about 56% of them. They have resources. So if they're in your churches, you should be engaging them so that they too can participate in that culture of giving. They may not be giving to church, but it doesn't mean that they're not giving to any causes. A lot of their support are for non-religious, non-religious interests. And we also know that our silent generation, which is
procedure, you have to collect that P, okay?
Our silent generation, which is about 3% of our population, and our boomer generation, which is about 41%, are those who are faithful tithers, those who make their gifts in those weekly giving envelopes, and those who give because that's what they've always done. That's how they know it, and nothing will change that habit. And one thing we need to keep in mind is we have people in our congregations who are very small donors. They may give very minimal gifts, but that does not necessarily mean that they don't have the potential to make larger gifts, especially after their lifetime. We know that the boomer generation owns a majority of the wealth that will be transferred after their lifetime. So we should be paying attention to those people who are, one, aging, two, those, even those who make smaller gifts, because they have the potential to make those transformational gifts after their lifetime. And if we're not having those conversations with them, others are. So we need to pay attention to who are those faithful donors who give all the time, but who give small gifts as well. We all love the larger gifts when they come in, which helps us with our daily current operations and programming, but we also need to keep in mind the potential future gifts that can be transformational for our ministries and how we cultivate those relationships and steward those donors so that they can leave us in their will as heirs. So the top pictogram is just the different generations. And then the bottom right diagram just shows the number of people who are living in the different generations. Then the next thing we'll talk about is stewardship, and no, I'm sorry, we'll go back to gratitude, to competition. I always look at my environment. I mentioned earlier that when I move to a new community, I do an environmental scan. I always try to identify who's my competition, and we don't tend to think about that in church. We just assume that our members are devoted to God and to ministry, and their gifts will come to us. But we do have competition. And a lot of our competition is those larger organizations, usually the national organizations that do a very fantastic job of marketing impact investing and getting people to give that way. But our competition involves those who are unchurched because they don't have any interest in giving, but they have a potential. And also those who do go to church, but instead of giving to church, they give to those other causes like social and environmental issues, animal welfare, human rights causes, and you name it. So let's take a look at those who are unchurched. And this data is a couple of years old, but it is still relevant. When I looked at this, what struck me was our own Twin Cities, Minneapolis and Paul, is in the top 14 cities that have the highest percentage of unchurched people. So I'll repeat that. This map shows the cities across the country that have the most unchurched people. The national average is 22%, and Minneapolis St. Paul is 23%. So we're higher than the national average. The orange dot shows those cities that are above the national average, and the blue dots are those that are on or below the national average. So what this tells me is we have a lot of opportunity for people to be able to partner in mission to support their interests, which are aligned with ours. We know that Portland, Oregon is the city that has the highest number of unchurched people. And because of that, they've been able to do a lot of creative things to help them in overcome this or make this situation work for them. And one of the things that they've done is collaborating across denominations to support missions and to support ministry. So it's no longer about what the Presbyterians are doing and what the Methodists and the Baptists are doing. It is all about what are we as Christians doing together? How are we spreading the word of God together? And how are we working together to support missions in our community? So there's an article about the Catholic nun helping the imam develop a curriculum for their school. There is a congregation that has, because they have a large building and it's costly to maintain that building, they decided to open a bar downstairs. Now, I'm not suggesting that anybody does that, but they have the church services upstairs and they have the bar in the basement. And the money that they raise from the bar goes to missions. So people come to that bar because they know that a percentage of their proceeds from buying beer will go to help the hungry in the community, will go to help after school programs and all of those things. So it's a mission supported cause. They don't see it as, oh, just going down there to drink some alcohol. They see it as an opportunity to partner with others, churched and unchurched people, to make ministry happen in their community. So those are lots of opportunities that we have. Now, I did mention earlier that the number of religious organizations that receive gifts from people who attend church continues to decline. So think about this. In the mid-70s, for example, it was 51% of people who were giving to church. By 2010, between 2010 and 2014, that number had reduced to about 33%. Last year, it declined by a percentage. So we know that over time, that trend will continue to go downward because we continue to have fewer people that attend church, traditional church. We continue to have other causes that the younger generation find more appealing to support financially. But the good news is we know that giving across the country continues to be very important to individuals. That means individuals are the ones who give the majority of the gifts to any philanthropic cause, whether it's a church or whether it's another one of those causes that I mentioned earlier. So there is hope for us. We just need to be able to learn to craft our message, develop the relationships, target our market, and market to our congregations according to the ways that are meaningful to them so that they are inspired to help us in our work together. So the final slide is stewardship and gratitude. We all know that we have a responsibility to be good stewards of the resources that are given to us, whether it's at home, whether it's at church, whether it's in the community, and God expects us to do that too. So when we think about our relationships and how we develop those relationships and cultivate those relationships for current and future giving, we, in the philanthropic circles, it's called the wheel of philanthropy. You have cultivation as one, the beginning of the wheel. You have stewardship, and then you have gratitude. No gift is too small to express gratitude for receiving. So let's talk about cultivation. When we cultivate our relationships, we build trust, and we build the environment where people feel comfortable to ask each other for gifts. That makes you feel a little more comfortable to say, hey, Sally, you know about this mission project that is happening. How are you interested or willing to help? And somebody else who's in the congregation can say, well, Sally, I made my gift to support X. Will you join me? That person encouraging somebody else to give is a more impactful request for support than if it's coming just from the pastor. And that's why it's so important for us to find our champions in the congregation who will help us with our messaging. So stewardship, how do we steward our church members, our tithers, our givers? We continue to carry on the message that money is needed, not to put the lights on, but to continue ministry and continue missions. And so when we share our stewardship stories, we should embed them in our daily, weekly conversations with our congregation. Do not wait until it's Stewardship Sunday and we have this big, this is Stewardship Sunday, this is why you should make your gift. This conversation should happen all year long so that people get, one, comfortable with it, two, they start to find those areas where they too can connect with the aspects of ministry that's important to them. And then we should always remember that no matter the size of the gift, it's worthy of gratitude. So if somebody puts $1,000 in the plate and somebody puts $10 in the plate, both givers should be thanked. Now, you would automatically say the larger donor should get the majority of my time, which is true, but that smaller gift, the donor of that smaller gift should get some of your time too. And remember that those small repeat gifts come from people who have the potential, who may have the potential to make larger gifts after their lifetime. And they tend to be the little old widows, those people who always feel like no matter how much money they have, they probably unsure that it's enough for them to live on. Those are the ones who have the potential to transform your ministry by making that large gift after their lifetime. So we should always remember to thank those small donors too and engage them in ministry. So we are like our large gifts to those opportunities that allow us to meet our daily operations, meet our daily mission needs, our daily ministry needs, and we cultivate those relationships for larger after our lifetime gifts to future gifts that will help us to carry on the ministry into the future. So when we look at this, we should always keep in mind, what can we get today to support today's work, but also what am I doing to help cultivate those and steward those relationships for future work. Then we also want to look at some of the literature and the data that's out there about transfer of wealth. The transfer of wealth, that phrase just means how much money will be transferred from one generation to the next as generations pass on. We know that the boomer generation owns the majority of the wealth in the US today. And we also know that by 2017, $9 trillion would be transferred from estates. That's what the transfer of wealth is. And a lot of that money will come from the boomer population. So look in your congregations again, who are the boomers? Who are those who have the potential to make those gifts? You already have them, so they have the interest because they come to church regularly. They have the linkage. They probably grew up in the church. They probably got married there. The kids probably got married there, so they have strong ties. How are we having those conversations with them so that when that transfer happens, it just doesn't go to their kids, the church is included as well. So we need to be able to craft our messaging to have those conversations around the future giving also. Then finally, we want to talk about gratitude. We all know, and we learned this since we were in kindergarten, say please and thank you. Thank you goes a long way. In my industry is 7 thank yous for any one gift. So you have 7 opportunities to say thank you for any gift that is made. That just helps to reinforce the level of gratitude that you show and how important that gift, no matter the size, is for the work that you do in missions. So you've heard me talk a lot about missions versus ministry. And the reason why that is because as we look at the trend in our country, we look at those ways that are impactful for our younger generation. Our older generation understood or understand ministry. They've always been in church. They know from the beginning that it's important to tithe, and they are faithful givers. But keep in mind that between 10 to 25% of people who give only. And how can you continue that and potentially grow it? So we look at missions as an opportunity to engage the younger generation in the life of the church, because that's what Jesus was all about too. He fed the hungry, he cured the sick, he took care of those people and met their daily needs. And that is what is important to our younger generation. They want to see that impact investment happening in their communities. So we need to create those opportunities for our younger generation to feel that connection and not have to go outside of our congregations to experience that. So you should probably ask yourself, where are the millennials in my congregation? What happened to those kids who were born in this church, who went to Sunday school here? Some of them after college probably return home and they're probably in your communities. They just maybe not going to your church. And the question should be why and what can I do to bring them back? A lot of the young people would not go back to their parents' church because they think it's boring. You know, it's just the same thing that we grew up with. We want to be able to connect at a different level. We want to be able to pay, not only just give our tithes, but see where it goes and see that impact directly into our communities and into those causes that are important to us. So keeping in mind that we do have competition, we need to be aware of the different generations in our congregations and the ways that giving means, or the ways that giving is important to them. We need to be able to show gratitude, and we always need to be able to build strong, trusting relationships with our constituents, our members, our gifters, our donors. So that is what I have to share today. Are there any questions? Oops. Trying to unmute now. I need help, Karen.
I think a lot of people muted themselves, so if they have questions, they can unmute. I don't.
Okay, so would you unmute your mic so you can ask your questions? Okay, so let's minimize the presentation. Maybe that'll help. Or close it.
Close it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Stop share. Let's stop share.
Okay, there we are. Is everyone there and awake? Did I put everyone to sleep?
No, we're still here.
We're here.
Okay, so
my
share your
question,
thoughts. What are you thinking? What questions do you have?
Shirley, just as a practical reference, this is Darren asking, can you hear me?
I can.
When you're at Rice Memorial, do you send out different letters and different generations? Do you send out different kinds of appeals to different generations is what I'm asking.
I send my appeals based on the the service line. So the cause that is important to the
Okay.
patient. So for example, if I'm working on a project for rehabilitation services,
Okay.
I will identify those people who have had a cardiac event or maybe a hip replacement and all of those different, you can fill in the blank, and then we'll target those people who have had an experience in that service and request their support that way.
Okay.
And keep in mind that when we do our appeals, letters are great, but phone calls are so much more appreciated.
Okay.
So we always should look for those opportunities. Again, I talk about how we segment our audience and we tailor our messaging to support, to reach them better. We know that we can get a much better response rate from an elderly person who loves to read a long letter. But is that the same way that we will target a 22-year-old? Probably not. You may be looking to social media to have that same message sent to the younger generation. So that's how we segment our messaging.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Okay, since no one has a question for me, I have a question for you. Is this what you were looking for, the information that I provided? Is this what you were expecting, or did you expect something different?
I really found, I read an article in, I think it was the Star Tribune yesterday about political campaigns and how they're really relying on those small donations. And, you know, sometimes I think in the church, we forget that those small donations can really make an impact over the time. That was just a good reminder.
Yes, that's true. You know, we've heard over the last how many years that for political campaigns, how much more money people raise from those $25 donors and those $10 donors. It's because they were engaged and because they were, you know, asked in the ways that were meaningful to them. And so that's how they give. And again, those $10 and 25 donors were thanked. So they didn't think much about repeating their gifts. Those repeated, recurring gifts are so important because that's an indication that you have the potential to get a larger gift over a period of time.
Shirley, I remembered one question I had. This is Darren asking again. This will be my last question too. The church, for most of the people that I minister with, is one of the largest charitable organizations that they give to. When I do a wills emphasis appeal, one of the responses I get is, well, I gave to them during my lifetime. I'm going to give to some other organizations upon my death. How do I respond to that?
You can respond by saying that your gift, this is how I craft my messaging, your gift will help us to continue the work that has been important to you all your life. And we talk about annualizing your gifts after your lifetime. So you've made your gift during your lifetime. When you're gone and you don't make provision for that giving after your lifetime, then we aren't able to continue ministry in the ways that have been important to you. So that's how we have the conversation.
Okay.
And we always stress the fact that we're not asking for 100% of your gift in your will. Just give us a percentage. Give us 10%. Give us, And when you use the 10%, it is so meaningful to the boomers and the older generation because that relates to their tithe, right? So use that as a measure of, could we get 10% after the remainder of all of the obligations to your estate, can we get 10% to continue this work?
And my husband is here. My husband Scott is here, and he's the pastor at the church in Redwood. And along the lines of Darren's question about Will's emphasis, we have members who won't give to. They'll give regularly to the church, and once they die, they don't want to give any significant amount of money to the church because they're afraid they're going to kill the church. We had one member who gave literally millions of dollars to other organizations, but not to the church when he died, because he was told by a pastor in the 1960s that if you give a large gift to the church, you will kill it. So do you have any advice for how to respond to something like that?
Well, if you're having conversations with that person, hopefully over time, you can demonstrate that that was not an accurate advice or good advice. Because yes, it's like giving too much money to your children so that they aren't able to do anything. It's, it doesn't mean that that'll happen. If you raise your kids well, you would expect that they would use their gifts wisely. So it's the same thing with an organization. And when we have those conversations over time with people and continuously demonstrate the need for them to include the church in their state, they would see that, okay, what I'm doing today will continue if I give that support after my lifetime. And I will be able to make an impact that way. And those transformational gifts are the ones that a lot of churches are living off of today because people then made those wise decisions to include the churches in their state. Now, when I moved to this area, the big question or the big statement that I heard repeatedly was, my money, I have it, and it's gonna go to my children and to my church. And Darren, I said repeatedly, and I still say it today, can we get a little bit of it too, so that we can continue to have quality healthcare services in our community? That will also benefit your children and your neighbors and your loved ones. And that is a message that is appealing to people. So now I can say that there are people who are thinking and responding to that message, but it didn't happen overnight. We don't have this conversation, it's not one and done, it's a continuous conversation always.
This is Galen Smith down in Worthington.
Hi, Galen.
You made a distinction early on about not making, they asked to pay for, the bills for the heating and the lighting and stuff like that. And then you've also talked about the distinction between, you talked about asking people to give for ministry or mission as opposed to ministry. Could you kind of clarify the difference as you see it between ministry and mission?
The way that ministry is how we define it traditionally. We have ministry, so we tend to look inward at how we take care of our congregation, how we do all of those things that support the life of the church. And then when we put on the mission lens, we look outwardly. We look at how do we engage our community in the life of our ministry. This is just not about us only, it's about how we impact others in our service to God. So that's the particular distinction. And the younger generations, mission means more to them than ministry, because in their minds is how they impact their neighbors, how they respond to social justice issues. And we do that work too in church. Don't we raise money to help with people who are impacted by natural disasters? Don't we do family promise? Don't we do all of those things that help make our communities better and demonstrate the love of Jesus Christ? Absolutely we do. We just don't market it in that way. And that's why it appears to be different. And that's why I made the distinction between mission and ministry, because the younger generation see it as impact investing. We need to be able to say, yes, we do that too. And your gift to the church will go even further, because we can demonstrate how those gifts have been used, and they may be even impacting people in your congregation. Any other thoughts or questions? Now, I had asked a question before. Did you find this information helpful? Is this what you were looking for? Because in my mind, when you talk about asking, it's just not, you're going through the phase. You just don't ask. You have to be able to build the foundation to be able to have an effective ask, to be able to, like all the things that I talk about, build those relationships, try to make the environment comfortable so that when the asks come, people understand why and they understand the impact. Anyone else? Going once? Well, I want to say thank you to each of you for taking the time this morning to have this conversation. As you think of questions that you have and you would like to reach out, my contact information is here in the office, and you can just reach out to me with your questions, and I'd be happy to have a conversation and answer those questions that you have. Thank you again very much for joining me this morning.